Madam Chair, you're now live.
Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Annapolis Environmental Commission on our March meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:04. And first order of business, I just would like to take roll and have the Annapolis Environmental Commission members say your name and what ward you're representing. So we'll start with Jeremy. I think you're the first one on my box.
Jeremy Hansen, Ward 5.
Bill O'Leary, Ward 2.
Kate Bohannon, Ward 2.
Ann Stevenson, Ward 2.
Allison Colden, Ward 7.
And do we have any other members here? Oh, and I'm Bevan Bucheister and I'm Ward 1. And I'd just like to welcome our Alderman, Rob Savage. Welcome to our meeting, and we'll certainly give you time if you need time to talk about anything. We also have a few guests here, Shelley Wrench from Annapolis Landscape Architects. And I believe your colleagues will be joining you to talk about a project later on in the evening. So our first action item is approval of our February minutes. I hope you all got a chance to read them. I know I just have two little changes to section C of the minutes, where it says discuss proposal to handle issues between meetings. On the 6th line down, it says based on general guiding principles, but are noted limited to these issues on development projects, but it should be not instead of noted. So that's just one little correction.
Guiding principles, but are not, okay, got that.
Right, and then from that line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, or 4 or 5 lines down from that, where it starts with not overdeveloping to allow for a balance of natural man-made features. And it says, and allowing for, as well as maximizing public access. So just take that and allowing for out and just keep as well as maximizing public access. So it was just too many words in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that's all the changes I have. Did anybody else have any other changes? Okay, if so, can I have a call to approve the minutes? Motion to approve minutes?
Moved.
All right, in a second.
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 All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. I just wanted to mention that we had a few action items from the last meeting. I just wanted to remind you what they were and let you know what their status was. We wrote a letter of support to the department for the Hawkins Cove restoration and improvement project. So that was for their grant that they were submitting. And then we wrote a letter of support for the Public Works building as well, and noted some of our questions, and that went to the Planning Commission. And then we also sent the letter that Allison drafted to the Planning Commission on the Bemby Beach Road development. And that's why our guests are here to talk to us about that tonight. And also I wanted to mention that I spoke to the Watershed Stewards Academy, and Allison is in the class that I spoke to. So we got a new volunteer to help us review legislation from that event. So that's really great. So I did want to see if our guests were ready to talk about the Bemby Beach Road development. If you're not, we can move on to the other action items. I was just going to switch our agenda items and go to that first, but we do have to vote on a few things. So if you're not ready, is Leo here?
I know Leo intended to be here, so maybe do a few other things first.
All right, sure. Yeah, so we have the first up on the action items to vote on was the Tucker Street boat ramp legislation that we did discuss last meeting. And that is ordinance 521. And that was going to require a permit to launch, boats from trailers or rafts, kayaks, canoes, anything. So we did have a discussion about, we felt that that was really impeding people's ability to get out on the water, and it had a disparate impact on low-income people in our community to have to go get a permit. So Rob, did you want to mention something, Alderman Savage, about that?
Yeah, well, thank the commission for your comments on that, because we did get that in time to talk about at which committee. I think it was Environmental Matters Committee. We were talking about that last week. And so we have an amendment. So we didn't take action on the legislation yet. We wanted to get an amendment drafted, and it's going to basically clarify that only the motorized watercraft are going to need to get a launch permit. And it'll specifically say that the non-motorized are basically, they're going to be kind of directed to the beach, launch from the beach access and not the ramp, to help address that concern. All
right. Did you still want comments from us? I know Alderman Tierney took our comments that we had talked about and provided them for you, but we also got in touch. Did you need a letter from us? And the other thing I was going to ask you was, with this permit, will it be like the citywide permit, so you could also launch from Truxton Park or use any of the city launches? Because that would make it easy for boaters instead of having to get a permit for each single launch site.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was specific to the ramp, but I'll have to check.
Yeah, because I do think that we should try and make it easier for people to get out on the water and not have to get a permit for every launch site. And maybe if that made the permit went up in cost because it covered all of the launch sites in the city, that'd be a smart thing to do.
Yeah, and one of the drivers behind this is that this Tucker Street ramp it's a relatively small light use ramp in terms of light duty, I should say, not light use. And so they don't, and it's also they kind of don't want, the residents don't really, they have an interest in limiting some of the traffic, and I think the desire is to make sure that it's primarily city residents. It was talked about having a restriction so that it can only be used by city residents, but there was a lot of debate about whether or not we could do that. So the law office was looking into that aspect, but as an alternative, we could always just, like we do at the pool, raise the fees for non-city residents when they get these launch permits. But still, anybody who has a light craft would be able to launch regardless of where they're from.
Yeah. And I just did want to point out too that launch ramp was there well before the houses were ever there. So, people who build a house next to a ramp and then, complain about the public access site, they shouldn't have deference for their wishes to be closing it down,
Yeah, no, I think I overstated. They certainly don't want to shut it down, but they're just concerned about, they don't want to see the huge boats coming in there and people parking all up and down their street, because it is intended just for the Annapolis community. Yeah.
Right. And plus, I guess I spoke to Alderman Paone about this. Like, if we used any program open space money, you can't limit it to only city residents. Then it has to be.
Yeah, and that's why I think the Truxton boat ramp has to be open to everybody.
Okay. Any other questions for Alderman Savage on this? And did you need a letter from us, or do you feel like you already got our input?
No, I think, I don't think you need to bother. We got your input. Your input was really helpful in this case, because I knew of the concern, but I didn't know quite the detail behind it. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So I see Leo Wilson is with us. Hi, Leo.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Good. Thanks for having us.
So I will table the next thing on our agenda, and we're going to move to invite our guests to talk about the Bemby Beach development, and that we had sent you a ton of questions. So I do want to take about 20, see if we can keep this about 20 minutes and give you an opportunity to answer the questions. I don't know if you wanted to throw them up on the screen. I think I have them here. I could share them as well.
Yeah, so I think maybe if you put the questions up, I'm not sure we're going to go through each one of these
Right.
in detail, but we can go over some broader issues and then drill down on the ones that are still of concern. Shelley's here to talk about it, and she's really kind of our landscape and environmental consultant for the project. And we're working with Terry Schumann as well, but we felt that for the informational purposes you guys are looking to have addressed, Shelley and I would do our best to handle those. So,
Yep.
Okay, I'm still looking. I had it open. I'm still looking for it. So if you all, do you have it open? Or do you want to share?
Dev, I was hoping you could start with the illustrative plan of the project and I could give an overview.
Okay,
And
sure.
maybe after that, any questions that aren't already answered, you could go to the list of questions.
Sure.
And Bevan, also I want to mention that Cynthia Godinius did reply to the questions as well. She sent it out. Not everybody may have seen it. It went out about 6:02 p.m. tonight.
And maybe that's what I have. That's what I have up. So I didn't realize that.
Yes,
That was Cynthia.
Cynthia's responses are in highlighted in
okay.
yellow.
Yeah, I
Okay.
found it now. AE responses highlighted. Okay. But yeah, let me let you, Shelley, go ahead and review what the plan looks like and what it does. Did you want to pull that up?
I sent it to all of you, so I was
Right.
hoping
Let's see.
somebody on your end could pull it up.
Okay.
It was a one-page kind of introduction and then a enlargement of the park and then an illustrative of the whole site. Yeah, so the third page in that,
And I've got it up. Can you see my screen?
Oh, thanks, Allison.
yes.
Thanks, Allison.
Is this what you're looking for?
Yeah, so if we can get that a little bigger. So I know you're all very familiar with this site. It's 5 acres between Bimby Beach Road and the Chesapeake Bay. And this project goes way back. The interaction with the planning and zoning started in 2010. I think Debbie and I started working on the project in 2012 and Leo's joined several years back. But even before 2010, I think this project, as I understand it, there was a 5-year process that was the annexation process. So really this project started in 2005. Over the last 11 years that it's been actively in planning, it's gone through really a multitude of iterations. The zoning allows, the straight zoning without any constraints whatsoever allows 61 units on this site, and the project as proposed as a development project has ranged between 40 and 45 units, with the most recent iteration that was submitted is 40 units. So we're basically 21 units below the strict zoning allowance. What we've really looked at is providing beach access for the public is tied to this project, which I think there's a lot of very technical details of how to manage that, how to maintain that, how to organize that, all the various responsibilities between city and HOA that still remain to be ironed out. But I think we all really believe that more people should have access to the Chesapeake Bay. So that's one thing this project delivers. Another thing that I think Theo Rogers has not really been acknowledged for is building the Grove. The park, there's an enlargement of it here also, but the park, which is the central open space in the project, actually, if you can go back one page, is basically the same, roughly the same size as the park at Acton's Landing. So it's really nice to have a open space that's not just a residual peripheral unresolved open space that's actually designed as a kind of an environmental wooded park for the community. So that has sidewalks on both sides. So there's plenty of access through mulch paths through the wooded zone and several different wet areas that are processing. There's all kinds of stormwater on this site, as you know. So one thing we think is really a key element is this park space. And then And again, it's basically roughly the same, a little bit bigger than the Acton's Cove Park, actually. And then if you, I guess, go back to the main plan, another thing that we worked hard at is really engaging the wetlands, as opposed to having the wetlands kind of tucked behind buildings. So you can see the road sort of bows around the wetlands. And that darker line represents a living wall, which we've actually used a lot of. So it's basically, instead of having structural, it's really only 3 or 4 feet high. So number one, we're not talking about a major wall, but rather than having to do structural footings in a wall that doesn't breathe and isn't green, a living wall is basically an armored slope, usually like a 1-to-1 slope or even steeper. But the idea is essentially tying what's called socks or filter fabric tubes, but basically tying that back into the landscape and then planting the face of the wall with native plants. So that's something that is a green technology that we think will really allow people to see the beauty of the wetlands. Another feature we have is a small drop-off area where you see this circle. So as people want to go down to the bay, they'll have a place to park and unload kayaks and go down to the water. So where that feature, actually, there's been some preliminary discussion on having that also serve as memorial circle, because there's all kinds of really fascinating music history, African-American music tradition that's happened, you know, as you all know, on Carr's Beach and this whole area. The reality is, and then the reality is that we're working within the city code. So the city code, we've spent the last 11 years following the city code requirements. If you extend out to 2036, I think the year is, we have, according to our calculations, 57.97% canopy coverage. So we've been doing that kind of homework. And there's all kinds of super detail in the code, but the one thing that is driving this project is trying to balance the idea of creating a beautiful community with the environmental requirements as they currently stand. And as I said, I think we've been back and forth with planning and zoning. I have a memo here from Alan Hyatt that's giving me 7 different submissions with different unit counts. So there's been at least 7 points in time that we've submitted something to the city. So there's literally been, I don't even know how many meetings, but I'm guessing at least 100, because I know at one point I tallied over 30, and that was 3 or 4 years ago at least. So all I'm really saying is there's been a lot of effort going into getting the site to where it is now. And we understand, you know, the environmental issues, and are really doing our best to balance what we what the code is basically driving, and you know, the bigger issues are kind of beyond the scope of this project. So I guess I should just say it out loud. It's like we totally believe in global warming, but that's definitely a larger scale than this individual project. So that's sort of the fast overview. I don't know, Leo, if you want to add to that.
I do, and then we can get into the more specific questions. I got involved in 2019 when, you know, Theo's development team kind of felt like they weren't really getting anywhere. And so, you know, I came into the project and I looked at what they had. They had a developer involved, which, you know, I mean, I don't mean to speak disparagingly about other people's work, but I thought some of it was just, you know, they didn't really understand the community down here. They didn't understand the concerns about the environment perhaps, but most importantly, I think that, you know, they just couldn't step back enough to kind of think about how do you get to yes here. And so for us, yes meant we kind of had to scrub a lot of the initial thoughts and just say, what can we do here to figure this out? And so the area where the circle is right now, there were two townhouses down there. Excuse me. And after discussion with Cynthia and the rest of the design team, we convinced the owner to do away with those because they kind of blocked what would be the natural inflow and outflow from the wetlands area. And the wetland has changed slightly since the initial survey. But again, it's been resurveyed and it's accurately depicted on this drawing. And so the removal of the townhouses is a big win for the environment because now we've got a continuous grove of trees and woodland area around the wetlands, which will be established and saved in perpetuity. I mean, that's a great thing. The second thing we did is we looked at the area adjacent to the wetlands on the upland side, and you'll see there's a large green area there with a second piece of that curved wall that Shelley was just describing. And we took 2 houses out there too and said, I don't think you're creating a problem in terms of your housing layout for most of the other area, but the stuff that's adjacent to the wetlands needs to be, reconsidered. And so that's how our count dropped. We tried to preserve the areas that were most sensitive in terms of, impact from development and create areas that would work really well. And then finally, and this is the big win for the environment and the community, is public access to this beach. It took a long time for everyone to get their head around that, but we've got it set up now, and Alan Hyatt's working with the Office of Law about how access is controlled so that the community feels safe and protected, and the larger Annapolis community feels they have access from areas like the park across the street down to the bayfront. And so we've got parking there for guests, we've got a circle, we've got a path down to the water, and we've got a wooded buffer between the houses and the beach itself proper. And so, that was received favorably from our neighbors to the south at Chesapeake Harbor. We've also made strong efforts to look closely at how these plantings are handled. It's all native species. We've made adjustments to that. We saved what we could, and we're planting for what we've taken out. And so, and even the way I'm looking at this is this will all have to be a lead project, right? So one of the things you can do is you can use these, because this is more of a residential type project, unlike DPW, which we'll probably talk about later, you guys might talk about. But in this case, you can use this project as kind of an instructional or educational program where people can come down and see what was done, how these wetland or bioretention areas through the center park are connected to the wetland area, and how that's controlled and treated before it could flow into the bay. So from my standpoint, it really is a great demonstration project, and it takes time for people to kind of come to a point where the owner's willing to give enough to make it work, and the community is willing to say, you've done a good job with what you've got here. And I think that's where we think we've landed. It was received well by the Planning Commission after we went through the iterations we've been through with them. They're in a good spot. I think staff has been impressed with the team's ability to try and take their input and put it back together in a way that makes sense. And while we haven't, been through every one of your questions, all of them are things we're asking internally and trying to make sure we have the best possible answer for. So that's kind of where I see us right now.
All right, thanks, Leo. I know, that local perspective for developers is really, really important, and it, can really delay projects if they don't have that for years and years. And we don't take any pleasure in that, honestly.
No, I know.
It's painful for us too. So, Allison, you had taken the lead on asking a lot of questions about this project. Do you want to ask a few of those while we have Leo here and Shelley?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple things that I just want to touch on, and then maybe this will kick off some conversation, and hopefully Jeremy will have time to ask his question as well. First of all, thank you both for joining us and being here tonight to give us some more information. We appreciate your willingness to, engage with us on the project. So one of the things that we touched on significantly in our questions and comments has to do with the wetland. So obviously it's in the critical area. It's an important nutrient buffer between the property and the Chesapeake Bay. There really is no downstream of this project. You're right there. So anything that is not treated is going right into the bay. There's no denying that. So we think the wetland is really important. And some of the scenarios that we included related to sea level rise, I think are important to discuss, even if they're not directly within the purview of the project as it's designed. So I'm curious, my understanding is that between a previous submission and this submission, the footprint of that wetland has increased, which could indicate that inundation has increased or the water table has risen in that area, which is increasing the wetland footprint. So I'm sort of curious as to, has there been any surveying work as to what's causing the encroachment of that wetland? Because I think if it continues to grow and become more inundated, then it's going to be pushing up against the built infrastructure that you've got planned.
So that's a good question. We did have an initial survey done to demark where the wetlands were and were not, and that went back, many years. And then it came up through Cynthia's office that, we're not sure it's in the exact same spot. So we went back out and had our consultant go back through it. And they explained, and we can provide the letter that describes it to you, that there were modest changes in the footprint of the wetlands, and it was more related to just overall erosion of the edges of it rather than, an expansion of it. That's just kind of an expansion of a wetland area. It was more of like, well, things are running into it, so more of it's low kind of thing. But we did remark it, and then in the new delineation, that's when it became apparent to us that the two townhouses down by where the circle were are no longer viable. I mean, right there, you're just blocking that outflow. Now, I mean, the houses, could I build in there? Sure, they build on the house 10 feet above the ground all the time. And that's what it would have had to be. But, for the greater good, it was like, well, that's where you want to make sure you have the ability to provide for some natural infiltration from the wetlands if there's overwash there, and not have that encumbered by any man-made infrastructure there. So that's why we went back to the green circle, and the plantings in that area are pretty consistent. So we also cut back this row of buildings, one building here, the one just above the wetlands. So yeah, I mean, it has been redelineated. We can share that information with you, and the plan reflects those adjustments, including the configuration of the living wall that forms the edge of the buffer between the wetlands and the roadway.
Yeah, and can you explain a little bit more about what's the purpose of the living wall?
Good question. So, you can build, once you're outside of that setback from the wetlands, you can build there, and you can build there in several ways. One is to build a man-made retaining wall there, which could be masonry or, those concrete pieces with some stuff growing in them. And this system is essentially, they're like hay bales that are long and they're almost like sausages. But what happens is the hillside is pulled back. Adequate material is put in place to support plant growth. And then these bales are laid back on an angle and staked into place and planted so that edge, initially you would see those bales. And then over time, that becomes a natural green wall. So it's natural from the beginning because it's all materials that are designed to, they're not a concrete piece. And so water can run down those when it needs to happen, and the plant material can absorb it. And it's one less kind of man-made piece to be as a buffer between the wetlands and the built environment. And we can send you information on that too, because we've got some really good imagery of that. So we're happy to do that.
Yeah, and the one other question, and then I'll turn it over to other fellow members of the commission. Our group, the commission, we're advisory to the city, obviously. And so even if future scenarios of sea level rise at this spot will not be the responsibility of you all as the developers and the planners, if this property or the bayfront part of the property is deeded to the city in some way, then that does become their responsibility, or it could become their responsibility. So that's why, we're concerned about the erosion that's possible. Blocking that marsh migration is probably going to lead to enhanced erosion along the shoreline under a lot of the scenarios that have been developed for the city of Annapolis. So just wanted to point out that concern about the possibility for increased erosion from blocking the migration of that marsh over time. So I don't know if you have any reaction to that, or if that was just a comment.
Well, let's talk about it first, because I think it's important. I mean, one of the things that we're doing here that kind of redirects flow is now it essentially sheet flows to the bay, right? And there's some smaller areas where there's depressions on the land, but it largely runs unencumbered right into the bay and through some of the wetlands, right? Because that's just how the land works. And so the redevelopment directs stormwater not to the bay, but to the bioretention areas. And there's about 7 on this property right now. There's some larger ones in the green space where the grove is. There's some between the rows of homes that you see. And there's even a small one directly adjacent to the wetlands itself. So everything goes into these bioretention treatment areas after the infiltration rates are exhausted in the open areas. So then it goes into the microbios. Microbios do their job to take infiltration, and only then does it go to the outfalls. So my response would be, what's happening here is less is going to end up in the bay untreated and at high speed than it does today by what's happening here. It's not cheap. I mean, it's a huge job, but I mean, that's the rule. So, I mean, you kind of do it. And lastly, preserving this, the green buffer between the beach and the development area is really a big help. I mean, that's a large area to slow that water down. I mean, I'm not sure it's a great idea to build houses where I can't see the water, but, you know, I mean, in this case, you know, that large buffer is really nice. And if you think about what happens at Chesapeake Harbor, it's kind of a different thing. I mean, it's clear cut to the water. So this is not that. This is a different approach.
Great. Leo, are those bioretention areas, are they kind of in blue on this plan? Is that
Yes, they are.
Okay. The little
They
blue
are.
spot. Okay.
Yeah.
See
And
them
there's
all
a
over
bunch
there.
of them.
Uh-huh. All right, let me ask Jeremy, you had your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I have a couple questions to make sure I'm understanding the diagram correctly. So you mentioned, or when looking at that circle, you talked about, I see that pathway down to the beach, or what looks like a pathway. And then you had talked about paths in that kind of park area, well, sidewalks all around it, and then some paths as well going through. So my first question was if there's plans for those to be paved, impervious, or some other material or unpaved on a paths, and then the second question was just that little tiny structure. I'm assuming it's a utility shed, but I just wanted to make sure.
So the little tiny structure is a pump station, right? And that's a lift for the septic or the sanitary. So again, that's lifted there and then sent into the public treatment system. So, and that's a separate building right at the turn there between the 2 roads. And then the paths, as Shelley mentioned, through the grove are all mulch paths, and there's no provision to pave those. You could go to semi-pervious concrete, or you could go to something else, but we like the idea of it being just as it's described, a grove where there's natural paths through it. Similarly, the path from the circle down to the water would be a mulch path, and you know that will take some maintenance, but we feel that's a better approach than trying to do a paved walkway down there. I mean, we could look at a wood walkway, but I think the natural characteristics associated with doing it out of mulch makes the most sense.
The only thing I would add is that the circle, we decided that we didn't want any traditional lawn on the site. So the circle we have planted with a native low carex grass that I believe matures at about 8 inches to avoid traditional golf course lawn.
Hello, I just had a quick question. My name is Randy. How you doing?
Randy?
What is left as far as construction and like installation with the project, and is it already kind of, has all of that, much of that work already been done?
No, none of that's been accomplished at this point. All of the infrastructure for the roadway and stuff needs to be constructed yet. So there'll be kind of there'll be the installation of water, sewer, and electric out to the building sites, and then the roads at that point. My guess would be that they would be not paved until the end, but they might get a base course or something in there, at which points the construction sites themselves would be ready to build out. And then we'd back ourselves out with the more final surfaces put in place towards the end.
Okay, and my question was, are you looking to try to replace some of that gray infrastructure with some green, sustainable design activities in that regard, with some of those installations, as well as the green infrastructure development aspect, in regards to plants and trees or shrubs and things that you plan on installing into the project? Are you looking to partner or contract with some minority-owned vendors and companies to do that type of installation work?
Well, so I'll answer it in two pieces. First off, projects like this in the city are required to achieve an environmental, I guess I would call it a response level. And in the city, it's a LEED certification for the construction, including all of the site work. So things like solar reflective values for materials like the paving are part of the equation. How much stormwater you treat is part of the equation, but then it also gets into the building construction itself, what materials you're using, how much of it's recycled content, and just general practices for management of waste as they come out of the project on things like this. So it will need to meet a LEED certification level that is, it's notable. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but that's how projects are run now. And then for minority owner or MBE involvement in the project, I'm not sure if you met Theo, but I'm pretty sure he's committed to making sure that this project is treated fairly. He's been a great advocate, and he's concerned, and he's well versed in the history of the community here in Annapolis. And I think if you had a conversation with him and he ends up doing this, you'll be satisfied with his response to that.
Yeah, and that was just, because it just seemed like a great opportunity to highlight some of the legacy aspects of the contributions that many have had in that area, specifically right there in that area.
Yeah, he's got us.
Seemed like a perfect
Shelley and I working on some, a way to memorialize the history of this site, because it really was a center point for activity that's not so much present in Annapolis right now. So he wants to make sure that people are aware. So we're looking at some designs for a memorial down in that circle. And he also wants us to mark it up by the road so people know what's happening down here. So that's kind of mixed into the development that, we're still working on, assuming we get one.
Right, so this is the location where Cars Beach was, right? Where they had all the concerts and
yeah.
And fun and everything. Yeah, okay. And so right now it's a wooded lot, and there isn't a road back there, is there?
No, it's just kind of all open woods.
Right. So I was going to ask Leo about pervious pavement. Do you have that built into this? Because that's one of the things that we look at too at developments.
Yeah. There are places where it makes sense to do it and places where it's less successful. And we talked a little bit about this when we looked at DPW. In the fire lanes, it's hard to use that just because you've got to provide for the capacity to carry large trucks in and out. And so it's less useful on that main road. But on the other roads on the property, we are proposing areas where we have pervious pavers in there. And it helps with stormwater. It is a maintenance issue in terms of the community will have to go in and vacuum those every year to make sure they don't get filled up with small sediment. But yeah, that's part of our process here. And as the drawings develop, it will be easier to see those on different sheets. There's about 60 sheets of site stuff. We can bring them all with us, but there are a good number of areas with pervious pavers. We are incorporating that. Or actually, it's going to be pervious concrete. It looks like Rice Krispie treats on
right.
Those.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to hear. Hey, Kate, you had a question?
Yes. Hi. My question was about the public access for the project. I really appreciated what you said about making sure that it's good for the residents, but also good for the broader community, in that we would have a public access point here. I guess I'll speak for the commission. We are a bit jaded perhaps because of a recent experience with a different project where there was a promise made to do public access as part of a development. And it was just a condition of approval. But then when it eventually was built, that was not achieved. So I'm wondering if you are planning to do a recorded easement or a more, I guess, a more formal way to incorporate that.
So another great question, and I appreciate the comment. So our condition is a little different than the one I believe you're speaking about, where in this case, we're deeding a portion of what was private property to the city, i.e. everything with the woodland and the beach. So the city is going to own that when we're done. And actually, they'll probably own it before we, that will be all configured legally before we get all of our approvals, right? Because Alan Hyatt, our attorney, is working with the city about, who's responsible for maintenance and how am I going to get to that beach? What are the rules there? And it ties into issues with the police department too about, how do we make sure it's a safe experience for people going down there and doesn't become a place for, illicit activity that, would make everyone uncomfortable. So we're going to work on hours of operation there. It probably will be from like a dawn to dusk thing, that kind of thing. And, there'll be cameras out there to make sure it feels safe and people will be made aware that, this is a controlled area. So it's about public access in a way that works for both the homeowners and the city. But my belief is that all of that is going to have to be answered pretty carefully before we'll get our final approvals. It's not like, oh, we'll tell you we'll do it and we'll work it out later. Like they're working on that now to try and get it figured out. So, and, we're happy to come back and talk to you guys about that as we get further down the road. But my belief is that, the city's learned a lot too, and the promises are not going to work moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you have an appreciation for that. So that's helpful.
Sorry, I was on mute. And I was going to say, yeah, a deed is certainly stronger than just, a condition of approval. So that is good to hear. Any last questions? Let me see. I check and see if anybody has their hand raised. I don't see. Go ahead, Ann.
I appreciate, thanks so much for coming. And I appreciate the update on the project. I think I'm just like a little mixed up about what's coming next, because it seems like the Planning Commission got back to maybe some folks on the staff this evening. You all are here now. It sounds like you're sort of working on the next iteration. So if you could just kind of give us an overview of where you see
process.
Yeah, and also when you think we as a commission could be helpful with additional questions or comments or participation in future meetings or whatever it is, that would be helpful.
Sure. So where we are right now is we submitted, we had our work session with the Planning Commission and we've had two. So since I've been involved anyway, to kind of narrow down what we really can and can't do. And that was where we came up with the reduction in unit count and the reconfiguration of some of the areas and the stormwater. But so that submission was made, and there's about 15 city agencies that provide reviews of that submission. If you think herding cats sounds difficult, try and get 15 people at the city to do their homework on time. It just doesn't happen. So it was due about 3 weeks ago. But in talking with Cynthia, we should have all of those comments back, and they'll be available on eTrackIt. They've promised us those next week. And so what we do from those is we do a point-by-point response to each one of the comments that comes through, many of which are redundant with yours about issues about trees and access and all of that. So we take our time to respond to all of those in a way we think will be successful. So it's like Matt Waters looks at stormwater again. The fire department looks at access. The police look at our system. All of those things are evaluated again. And at that point, they might deem it complete for final Planning Commission approval. So we'd be really lucky, I think. I mean, I'm going to guess if we could get something like that together for formal submission and back in for a public hearing in June, it would take an act of God, but I think we're shooting for it. And so maybe it would make sense for us to take responsibility to let you know that we've submitted that package and let you know that that's back in, and then you can go on eTrackIt and take a look at it. And then maybe we could go through another round of this and see what's open and what's not open, and then come back to you and maybe answer open questions there. Because oftentimes our approvals are conditional, that we make some, final changes to the plan before we get that, that green light to move forward. So if at that time there are open things we haven't addressed yet, then that might be a really good time for us to talk again. Because we'd sure like to have you guys come to the planning commission and say, these guys have been good partners and are doing what they ought to do. And the hope is you wouldn't come and say they didn't do anything they said.
True. Well, thank you. Thank you. I think this is a great start to this process. And I know you all have been working on it for a really long time, but this is our first deep dive into it. So I think that sounds like a good process. If you want to tell us, planning commission, planning department usually tells us as well, but always good to get another reminder, and then we can go back and forth from there.
Well, we'll take responsibility for making sure you know.
Okay.
And then, Shelley's reachable, I'm reachable. Theo, he wants to be a good neighbor. So that's why we wanted to join you tonight. I know the city couldn't do it, and they replied, in writing to some of the comments, but, we're taking them all into account. We're trying to make sure we're doing a good job too, because I want to do the next one. And if you guys don't think we did a good job, it just gets harder.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Appreciate you taking all this time and coming here on pretty short notice too.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Bill, did you have a question? I'm sorry. I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Bevan. I just had a quick question. You mentioned LEED certification, and I was curious if that included solar panels on the roofs.
That's a good question. It came up on another project recently. Solar is only one option of many. So what we're finding right now is that solar is a heavy lift for projects like this. You can provide the space for it, but the cost of the infrastructure combined with the fact that the technology is changing so fast, it's hard to mandate that be incorporated. I think there's more low-hanging fruit, if you will, that is easier to incorporate and pays greater dividends. For instance, like a more robust insulation system for these homes, and high efficiency equipment for the mechanical systems, and windows that are super efficient, and just looking at the durability of materials over time. So I'm not saying it's not a possibility, and each homeowner, as they purchase these, may decide to add them, and we'll make sure there's provisions in the structure and in the electrical system to do it, but we can't mandate that for each individual owner. There's just not a way to do it. But there will be parking spaces for electric cars, that type of thing will be mandated, and things like that will be incorporated. But solar is kind of that's a long reach for this project.
Okay. I was also curious how wide that main road is.
Gosh, I think it's required by code to be 24 feet clear. And I think that's from the fire department, needs at least 20 at the low pieces, but for two-way traffic on an open road, it's 24 feet as the cart path.
Okay. And I didn't see a ton of parking, which is kind of nice actually. So that's all the townhomes have garages?
Well, not all of them, but there's parking for each unit. Some are inside garages and some are on aprons outside. And then there's additional parking provided for guests. We went back and forth about whether you provide more or less than you need. Right now, we're right at the numbers, but we didn't exceed it in hopes that the world will continue to change and we won't need it.
Okay, thank you.
Leo?
Yes.
Go ahead and identify yourself. Is that Paul?
I'm sorry, Paul Murphy.
Oh, okay.
The soil in that area is likely quite sandy, so the geothermal probably is not as efficient in that area. My understanding is geo does not work well in sandy areas.
Well,
can you add some knowledge to that?
Sure. Again, as people decide that they want to be part of this project and decide to purchase a unit, they'll have an option to do geothermal because it's a 400-foot well that goes straight down. It's a 4-inch hole with a 2-inch tube down and up. And each one of those generates about a ton of heating capacity. So if your house needs 4 tons, you need 4 of those wells. And so they get drilled down and then they get filled back in. I think it's dolomite that goes back in. It's highly efficient. It's a great way to do it. I think the soil would support it because the water table is not that deep here. And so once I get into, groundwater, I can count on 54 degrees or so. So it's possible to do it. But again, we're finding that even if I were doing $1 million house for you, you really have to think about whether it's worth it. And it oftentimes comes down to what the government is willing to contribute to make that happen. So there was a time when geothermal was subsidized largely by government grants that said, I'll give you a break on your taxes if you put it in. But those evaporate early in the year, each year. So each homeowner might have an opportunity to look at that. But what we're finding is a really high efficiency gas system is really quite efficient right now. So natural gas or propane has been a big winner.
So the geothermal does not need to be decided way ahead of time. I mean, because who knows how many couple more years till they start building. But it sounds like it's an option that homeowners, if they wish to, individually do, or if we collectively, you say there's tax incentives that expire each year. That means they reappear each year. So plausibly, if we aggregate this project or any project, we can reduce the cost of providing geo. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if 3 or 4 owners in a row said, hey, let's go for it and let's get our drill guy out here and he can do 12 wells instead of 4 together, and they can be done right under their drive path. So they only have to be 8 feet apart to be effective. There's a radius of 8 feet. So I guess it's actually 16, but you could fit 3 or 4 in a driveway. So,
yeah.
If each person wanted to do it, I mean, there's not a lot of shared infrastructure here. There's not heated area that the community would own. There'll be electric, but not heated area. So not likely that it would be part of the developer's kit of parts.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming, Shelley and Leo, and we'll continue to talk to you as you hear the feedback from the city, all the city departments.
Great, thanks for having us, and look forward to working with you guys.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for having us.
So next, I'd like to go back to the agenda and look at the DEIJ recommendations to the mayor and city council, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice recommendations. And I was going to ask Randy, are you ready to pull them up so the commission could start to talk about them?
Sure. Yeah, I can share my screen.
Okay. Yeah, and so we had drafted a bunch of ideas, and we're going to save the formal drafting of the letter. We just wanted to run the ideas past the commission and give you a chance to, provide some input. Also wanted to mention that this isn't like the first and last conversation we're going to have about this for the city council, but this is the first memo we're sending to them, and with a lot of ideas for what the city could do to incorporate diversity and equity, inclusion, justice actions into their environmental work. So this isn't work that the commission's going to do. This is stuff that we're recommending that the city do. So go ahead, Randy. And we don't want to wordsmith tonight. We just want talk about the general ideas that we're going to provide to the city. So Randy, let me turn it over to you.
Yep. Yeah. Can everybody, y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, and we can see the screen.
Okay, cool.
Good, thanks.
So the goal here is just really quick. I'm just going through this real quickly, but the idea around this is to provide a learning environment, positive learning environment around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as it relates to the environmental industry, looking at different ways we can be more inclusive, training professionals, looking at ways we can be more in the know about how to increase abilities in regards to technical support, access to environmental outdoor spaces. Of course, Maryland being the first state to have a mandate for environmental literacy and education in the United States, we want to definitely focus on, have an emphasis on that as well. So this document is just an overview of how some of these ideas came about and what some wooden practices are looking at. And just a bullet points here, just looking at just revamping environmental organizations, hiring practices, standing with marginalized communities, supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmental justice initiatives, and kind of a synopsis, well, more of a consensus about what the direction or aim or philosophy is going forward that the Environmental Commission can adopt, that the city can possibly also encourage as well. So here's just like a running list. Here we have just some ideas for actual involvements and goals.
Right. So yeah, let's just go ahead and read through those ideas. Go back to number 1. So it was including a goal of minority-owned businesses benefiting from the environmental work that we're paying for in the city, our tax dollars. You know, we've got these green vest projects that we promised to spend, I think, 20 million over, I don't know how many years, but there's a lot of spending going on for environmental restoration, and we thought there should be some goals for minority-owned businesses to be participants in that.
And with the replant Anne Arundel, I was actually able to facilitate the first ever minority-owned vendor to land a contract for replant Anne Arundel. So that is kind of what the involvement that led to me kind of suggesting that the city adopt a similar program as Replant Anne Arundel with WSA, as well as helping to develop some examples of different environmental services that are connected to programs similar, like the READY program, which stood for Restoring the Environment and Developing Youth. And I was one of the developers on bringing.
Right. So we have all this environmental restoration work to do. We had a group that started with minority individuals, and we didn't hook them together. So that we need to do a better intentional job of doing that kind of thing.
And requiring firms to maybe have different scales of environmental mentors for hires that come from Black or brown communities. Just again to encourage that nature-based career, STEM career, science career, environmental career, inspiration, and doing that through different connecting mentoring programs and such. Supporting summer internships. You may be familiar with the C-Stream program, and the C-Stream program is just a good example of HBCUs getting involved with the internship aspect of environmental installation and restoration and sustainability. And the biggest interest being trying to encourage sustainable project ideas in communities, but through a social equity lens.
So yeah, we have a lot of environmental groups that do restoration here in the city, and it would be great if the city could support a summer internship program where people get paid a stipend for, you know, working with these groups, and then they learn the business, they make contacts, you know, they learn about grant writing or, you know, grant reporting, things like that. I know the city did a summer internship last summer, even during COVID, with some students in the high school. It wasn't focused on environmental, but it was focused on them, you know, learning how different departments in the city run. So I think it was, you know, a $20,000 program, but there's a real clear evidence that kids who do these kind of internship programs take off from there, and then they have better careers for the rest of their lives. So it's a really small investment and a really big payoff.
All right, and so working with locals, different organizations to point them in the direction to help start more, maybe like environmental businesses or things like that, and using a lot of grassroots to organizations to connect with, reaching out to Black and brown communities to review Green Vest projects to make note of any priorities that could be possibly included, and AEC can help with staff with outreach. This could be promoted through the Waterways Cabinet, which I am a member of as well.
Yeah. And they did some outreach at the beginning, and you know, I think, you know, it was basically one meeting that we all showed up at, and I don't think there was sort of really intentional outreach to the Black and Brown community. And if we're spending $20 million on environmental restoration, their concerns and priorities need to be reflected in that as well. But there needs to be more intentional outreach.
Support with city and private funding and environmental science and outdoor education, summer camp like School on Water. With the if this could be a kind of a pilot project for the mayor's office or council members, they could encourage these local philanthropists and environmental groups to support this through through funding or what have you, just similar to the Symphony of Arts connection. Right. And creating curriculums that are culturally and more so appropriate targeted towards some of the populations that are more underrepresented, underengaged in environmental.
Right. I see some hands up. I'm just going to let Randy run through the rest of the list, and then we'll take the questions. And comments.
So there's only a few more here.
Yeah. Okay.
Develop city champions and influential champions throughout the mayor's office, and I think we do. I kind of have an idea for definitely a few already in mind. But as mentioned before, I brought this up in previous meetings about trying to have a representative from the county, the state level, what have you, so that some of our sustainable activities can be kind of looked at from a scope of those who kind of have a contributing impact on that locally as well, not just kind of siloed as the city itself looking into those things. And just kind of creating a more strategic relationship, like having to identify a person that could maybe attend every other meeting of some sort and provide some kind of report on activities that we kind of can identify. Creating mentoring programs, develop career pathways for environmental outdoor jobs for local communities. Maryland DNR, Chesapeake Bay Program, NIFWIF, just to name a few partner and possible organizations, EPA, and a few others, providing workshops and things like that. And then supporting equitable landscaping and public housing, green infrastructure development. This could be through the tree or garden plots. And this is kind of what we had mentioned before about like programs like Replant Anne Arundel taking place in the city. It means to do that kind of social equity lens. And then maybe entering into some type of MOU with the city. With the housing authority. And helping community gardening programs, projects to encourage growing produce to minimize our food desert issue in places like, pockets throughout the city. And then maybe even looking at a Christmas tree planting project that would encourage some of the HACA community residents to get trees at a discounted rate, if not even for free, every Christmas. So that extra price of that, can be kind of a gift, but a lift up, but also an opportunity to engage in some growing practices and agricultural to business models. So that was pretty much it.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Thanks for running through that. I see a hand up. Paul, do you have a question, comment? And also we'll open it up to input from the commission. So Paul, you had your hand up. Got to take yourself off mute if you're.
Okay, Paul. Thank you, Randy. Box of Rain is one of probably several great local community efforts that is probably 12 years old now. Beyond their first decade, who work with a lot of underprivileged children in the area. And I don't know exactly their upper age, but they probably phase out at age 16 or so. I think they're aimed at the younger end of teenage years. But Box of Rain could be, and many of us, or several of us, have good relationships with the people who run that. I think they would be, and they do a lot of outdoor activities. They do kayaking, they do crabbing. There's a lot of outdoor activities through Box of Rain. And as I said, they've got over a decade of attendees. And Randy, I think they would love to help extend.
Set it up, Mr. Murphy, set it up. I definitely would love to talk to people, those at Box of Rain. I've heard their name and their organization a lot. I've actually worked with them in the past before, so they should be very familiar.
So Paul, in terms of Box of Rain and what the city could do, what are you saying that the Box of Rain could run some programs for?
I don't want to commit for them,
right,
but
okay.
it's a bunch of hardworking, soulful, good people that put a lot of effort into this, and it's growing. And as those children age out, and I don't think there's a firm age limit, it's more interest or lack of interest when a kid stops going. But it would seem some work experience would be a natural extension. I'm good friends with the founders, so I would be happy to do that. And in regards to food deserts, same thing I've only said for about 5 years, because I tried to do it myself and it hasn't gone that well, is there are some empty spots in Clay Street and next to the Elks Club. I think there's there's opportunity for pocket gardens along Clay Street, and that can help relieve the food desert. And again, Randy, I don't know for sure, but Annapolis Elementary, Green Street downtown elementary, used to have gardens that the kids go out and work on. And so my point is, most of the kids live near Clay Street, likely go to downtown elementary school. So they're seeing this gardening and at school, so it's not as foreign. It would be, a natural extension to come home during the summer months and re-around. But, you do a little gardening at school, you get some experience, and then you go back and take some quote ownership or responsibility for doing the pocket gardens in Clay Street. I do think the hurdle with local gardening is the delayed gratification. I sit there and stare at my tomatoes all summer until they get ripe in late July, right? So not everybody waits that long.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, so we kind of are, for this memo, we wanted to provide some, high level recommendations, and then, have the city bite on some of these ideas, and then we can go back to them. If they say, okay, we want to do this idea, we can help them, say, okay, this is the, hook up with Box of Rain, find out what organizations are already working in this space, and boost the effort, accelerate the effort, improve the effort. For gardens at school, I know the county's in charge of the school, so I'm not sure. I mean, the city can work with them because the city students are going there. But if you wanted to add something to the memo, recommendations for the city to pursue, what would that be, Paul?
Starting to utilize the vacant spots near Clay Street into pocket gardens. And what we tried to do when there was a farmer's market downtown is we tried to get the leftover food brought up to Clay Street to sell. And they're like, well, for all those farmers or vendors, coming to Annapolis and having to do 2 locations in one day was not working for them. So I think at some point we'll have a farmer's market again. And just trying to get more integration with, and I say Clay Street because it's close to downtown, so it could be anywhere. And as most of you know, SNAP, the food assistance, they double the value when you buy produce. So your $10 SNAP coupon will buy you $20 of vegetables. So better utilization, or starting to utilize some of the vacant spots in town.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Good addition. I see a couple other hands up. Let me just go down the line as I see them. Sorry, I didn't probably catch them in order. And you've got your hand up, and then Kate.
Yeah, thanks Randy and Bevan for putting this together. It looks really great. I just have 2 comments. I wonder if in citing specific opportunities for involving mentorships, or, you know, we point out the Green Vest contract, but it seems like there might be other projects or, you know, ways that we're investing environmental funds in the city. And, you know, Bevan's always talking about open space funds. And so like, I wonder if there's a way to make that particular point more general, just to not limit it to Green Vest. And I think in general, this kind of report's going to be really important, because it's not only pointing to the ways the city can start on projects, but it'll also be a document that the city can then use for like, you know, grant opportunities. And I think with all of the stimulus funds going into energy and clean jobs, that, you know, they're going to want to give Annapolis an AmeriCorps person to work on DEIJ kinds of issues. And the more kinds of documents we have with shovel ready kinds of projects, I think we're going to be a really good candidate for people looking for opportunities like this, not just us sort of making them. So I think it's a really great start. And I wonder, with that in mind, if we should suggest to the city to have someone on staff sort of look for some of those federal opportunities.
Yeah.
I know many of us touch them with our work, but staying on top of all of the things that are going to be coming out of, say, the Department of Energy over the next couple of years is, you know, that's why they pay people the big bucks, and that's not us.
Right.
So, you know, how we're going to sort of be able to leverage those kinds of opportunities is interesting to me. And I wonder if there's a recommendation we could include about, you know, designating someone in the city to sort of keep an eye out for grant opportunities.
Oh, that's a great point, and I love it, because, you know, the Biden administration said they want to devote like 40% of their funding for, you know, climate change and climate mitigation and things like that to, you know, marginalized communities. So I think that's a great point. We'll add that. Kate, you were next.
My comment is related. I think whenever we offer recommendations, we should be a bit more specific. I know when we sent in our priorities memo a few years ago, not only did we make the suggestion, but we also made a comment on the cost of roughly what it would cost, the funding source, the city staff or department who would be involved in the effort, the partners and stakeholders that would be involved, and whether it would require legislation. So I don't think the last one's relevant here, but I think we should add that to the memo if we can, just because it does give a bit more to go on. And I can send you, Randy, what I'm talking about from our last memo.
I agree, and I think that's a great idea. But yeah, once, you know, this is a very, very kind of, you know, it's broad kind of right now. But when we get to the point where we actually, you know, like the actual memo, it's going to be very.
And, you know, I also think that this is the initial conversation with the city. You know, the other memo we did was the transition report for the new administration. So we really put a lot of work into that, and that took, you know, months. So I mean, I feel okay about sending this as the initial conversation starter to go, we have a lot of ideas, you know, and we can sit down and put all that in work into it. But I mean, I feel okay about, you know, just sending this as the original memo with some high level ideas and going, okay, like, what, you know, and then having some conversation back and forth and getting it to like the waterways cabinet and saying, okay, let's focus, let's meet again on these ideas and go, where do we have near-term opportunity? What's longer term? Like, I feel like just having that conversation with ourselves, it isn't, you know, we can't do that by ourselves right now. I think we need to spread the ideas and then have a conversation back and forth with the city about that, and then then be able to do like the action plan sort of thing that we did for the transition report. So are you okay with that? If we just, I mean, I feel like it's good to get this conversation started. Let's
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just aware of not giving people a big list of ideas that
Right.
without anything to
Yeah.
move them. But I hear what you're saying. Maybe this
Yeah.
is the first step, so that's fine. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, Rob and then Jeremy.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think this is all great. This is a great start. Definitely want to commend everybody who worked on this, and look forward to the final product. Because I think it's definitely something that I think all the departments really need to think about this, but especially the ones dealing with the environment. And I think, but Kate really took the words out of my mouth in terms of, I think you're spot on with needing to kind of, I was going to suggest you're kind of recommending grouping some of these in different categories, because I do think some of these items would make a lot more sense for the city to do, but I think some might make more sense for outside organizations, because the city's not always going to be able to staff up and create that infrastructure. But we do have for you to keep in mind, we do have that community grant program, and there's often a dearth of environmental groups. They just don't apply for that grant. And I think if that might be something the commission could work with some community groups to get them keyed on that. And you have plenty of ideas in this report already. So for example, a local watershed group could get money potentially from the city to help pay for an intern, or perhaps help pay for a full-time staff person to help reach out to these communities and implement some of these programs. Because the city's kind of done something similar with like Annapolis Green. They've partnered with them on various efforts. So that may be one approach you could consider. It's not a lot of money they get from the community grants. It's often just a few $1,000s, but again, that might be enough to get something started or to help pay for something. But regardless, I'm definitely will do what I can to help you out once the report gets released, to get the word out there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. So Jeremy and then Allison.
Yeah, so I really liked Kate's idea. I was actually thinking something similar, but rather than grant funding, like having a person, whether it's with the city or a nonprofit or other outside group like Rob was suggesting might work better, is like we have all these community groups and these opportunities that exist for youth or kids or what have you. A lot of great programs like Box of Rain. And then we also know we have these a number of apprenticeships, internships, other opportunities, paid opportunities within the city or in nearby areas through nonprofits or government agencies. I feel like what I'm trying to articulate is having a person that helps make sure that these opportunities are advertised and communicated to these kids as they're going through these other programs or looking for that next step. Because how many of them know that they could apply for C-Stream or some other or some landscape architecture or landscape like apprenticeship. We just have so many opportunities, but I feel like
you're right.
The communication and the advertising doesn't make those links, and the pipeline falls apart a lot of times.
Yeah, and it's almost like a field liaison person, someone that would serve as an ambassador to particular communities, someone maybe from those communities or has already relationships in those communities. Because as you know, one of the biggest historical and cultural contextual pieces to this puzzle is that there's a big trust issue amongst when you have communities that may have differences. So having people that look like the community that you're attempting to impact can be the silver lining. Really, it's a best management practice. It's been proven to be a strategy to find those individuals who have that momentum and that influential champion that can drive those messages and drive those participation from people. So
Yeah,
I think you're right. And that's a big piece of that puzzle that just really, without it, things just slip through the cracks and people kind of work in silos.
And I think it'd be really powerful if, if there was somebody doing kind of like the grant opportunity hunting and compilation work or advertising alongside, or working closely with somebody who also has feelers out and knows about the various opportunities at different, development points in your career, whether it's like, just you're a high school student, you need an unpaid internship or maybe paid something, or an entry-level position after college. Like, those people could even work hand in hand a lot of the times, because a nonprofit would really love to hire somebody, but they don't have funding for that year unless they get a grant. So I think there'd be a lot of opportunity if something like that could happen. And not sure if that's city again, maybe it's nonprofit, but I feel like it'll take everyone working together.
Maybe we could get a foundation to fund a city position for that. I mean, there's grants we could look at for that too. Yeah. I'm sorry, Allison, you had your hand up too.
Well, this is just a quick pile on and more of a flag of one of these opportunities. Thank you both for your work that you've done on this so far. I think there's some really good stuff in here. But sort of to what Amy was talking about earlier, if we have this infrastructure in place that Randy's talking about procurement and setting the city up to have shovel-ready projects and have a network of minority-owned businesses that are ready to fill that pipeline. Climate Solutions Now Act, which is moving through the Maryland General Assembly, knock on wood, currently has a provision in there for 500,000 trees annually in Maryland, about $10 million for urban tree plantings, and to focus on marginalized communities. So if Annapolis has locations and contractors ready to go, I think it would make us more competitive to get those grants in the future, should they make it through the General Assembly this year.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so there's all these opportunities out there, but there's some linkages that are maybe missing here in the city with our community.
Can you shoot me that info somehow, Allison? And it was really good seeing you over the weekend too. I hung out with Allison over the weekend, y'all.
Great. So let me just take your pulse again. Take the pulse of the commission. Do you want to just send this on with these ideas, start the conversation, or do you want us to keep it back and do some more work on it and figure out those details like cost, who should be the lead, all this kind of timelines, thing like that, more like an action plan thing.
I'll just weigh in really quickly. I'm okay with some of the bigger picture items being the level we're at now. Maybe I would support some more formatting and
right
and headings and cleaning up that Rob suggested to make it easier for the staff to.
So this was just we usually don't even pre-write our letters before we take a position on things, but there were so many ideas in here, we just had to get them down on paper, so this wasn't the formatted version. But grouping was a good idea, and we're certainly would send it by you all first. I mean, for edits and things like that before we sent it. Okay, any other comments on that? Either way. All right, so why don't we entertain a motion to send these recommendations to the city council? Could we get a motion?
Is there an interim set to send it to like the mayor's office first? It seems like.
Oh, well, we're advisory to the mayor and the city council. So I feel like, these ideas, I think different people might want to pick up on different ideas and run with them. So I feel like I thought we should just send it to the mayor and the council all together. Rob, do you have any guidance on that? Sending it to the mayor and the council together?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Yeah. And we'd be happy to, we might even be able to have a work session, presentation on one of the whole council work sessions, which I think would be good.
Oh, yeah.
And this is Joel Brayton from the Office of Law. That's absolutely perfect and fine. I think that especially with the scope of the discussion here and the great recommendations you have, I think that the importance of the document supersedes anything else about policy, decorum or anything like that. I think that this is a document that must be forwarded to the administration.
All right, thanks, Joel.
Bevan, this is Paul. And I like everything we're working on. I had mentioned Box of Rain, and then also an organization that probably all of us are familiar with through Diane Butler being one of the lead people on it, is Seeds for Success, which is female only 10 to 17-year-old girls, something like that. So perhaps a little older than the pure recreation of the younger kids in Box of Rain, but Seeds for Success, planting job opportunities, career opportunities, independence. So I think maybe, and we know both of these groups pretty well, so it wouldn't take long. We ought to talk to them a little bit and flesh out things a little further before we make too much of a statement. I just think they could add a lot of good ideas. And also those are two entities that are probably each dealing with 50 to 100 kids a year. So that's a good chunk of foot soldiers on this.
Yeah, so I think we should mention something about working with the local groups that are already engaging our young people in outdoor activities and things like that too. But I guess we should give them a heads up. Go ahead, Jackie.
So just to mention about in the city, Lynn Farrow does review grant sources for us, and it helps us identify funding sources. However, nobody writes the grants. They just identify them for us. But she can't possibly look at everything. So I know that Racine is reviewing some grant opportunities, trying to get conversant with other environmentally related ones, because Lynn's looking at them for the entire city. And what happens is she refers them on to those of us who are interested in a particular subject area. So some of that work is already being done.
Okay, so I think it's still, still worthy of us recommending that people be looking for the all the federal stimulus grants and all the funding that's going to come through, and with climate change mitigation and all that stuff.
Right, and depending on what happens in the General Assembly, the state, if they pass the climate change bill, it's going to take some time. They're supposed to have all these review committees and such, but they are supposed to be appropriating money to local jurisdictions and providing grant opportunities. Some of those, the ones identified specifically, were around trees, tree planting, but they're supposed to identify other grant opportunities as well.
Okay, so I think we should probably still keep that in there though, because up till now, I had never heard that anybody was doing that for the city, and we did want somebody to be reviewing it and looking for the DEIJ connection with environment as well. Okay, so I think, did we have a motion? Do we have a motion on the floor to forward these recommendations to the mayor and city council once they're all polished up and the commission gets another look at the polished version?
So moved.
All right, and a second?
Second.
All right, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, it's unanimously in favor. So we will work on polishing up that memo and circulating it to you all before we send it to the commission. And I guess we'll put that in our Google Docs so you can edit, you know, edit and track changes and things like that.
I'm sorry, Bevan, who made the second? I didn't catch it.
I think that was Bill. Was it Bill?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Hard to tell. We can't see
Yeah,
your mouth because your picture's not on.
Yeah, I couldn't, I thought it was Randy, but
Yeah.
I wanted to be sure. Thanks.
Okay, so we have less than half an hour left, and I just wanted to move along and go to our development updates. I mean, some of these we don't have a lot of updates on, just but wanted to review and keep them on our radar. So Kate, did you want to talk about development and anything that's on the radar for upcoming reviews too?
I think Kate dropped off.
Oh, okay, sorry. So the 101, 103 Annapolis Street plan, and that was the issue with the two big trees in front. We heard from the planning department that they withdrew that plan. I'm not sure what the reason was behind that, but last I heard when they were working with the planning commission after one of the sessions, they had a work session, and Leo was the architect, and he made provisions to move the building back a little bit, change the design, and keep the trees. But so now they've withdrawn the plan, so not sure what's happening with that. But I'm sure something will come again. I'm sure it's not just dropped forever. Restoration updates, Hawkins Cove. Jackie, did you want to say anything about that? You got your permit in, or your proposal in?
Their proposal was submitted. We won't hear anything until
well, your sound is really bad, Jackie.
My volume's bad?
No, we're hearing a flutter every time you're talking.
Oh, I don't know why.
Like a bird is in your microphone or something.
Okay. Don't know how to fix that. It's still really bad?
Yeah.
Don't know what to say about that.
Hmm.
Okay. I can try to go out and come back in.
All right, we'll move along. I'll move along and to let Jackie have a minute to try and fix that. But the St. Mary's Living Shoreline DNR, we asked them to come present to us, and they're going to come in April. So they're working on a living shoreline there over at St. Mary's Church, where it's a bulkhead right now. So that'll be really good to hear about. The other one that got done in the city was over near St. John's College. So it's a really beautiful living shoreline now. I mean, it was like 15 or 20 years ago. We also, I think we got the final of the tree canopy report, and I meant to invite Brian Adams to come present, and that didn't happen. So I'm not sure if he has the final either, because I just talked to Jackie about that the other day. I know he had a draft of it, so I had thought he had the final one. So we can invite him to one of the next meetings as well. Hawkins Cove, I don't know if Jackie's.
Evan, I'm sorry. Is that document somewhere that we can review it, or is it online?
We did not see the one that Brian provided comments to, so I don't. I thought it was final, and maybe it's not. So I don't have it yet. I don't think it's online.
Are you talking about the tree inventory?
Tree inventory, right?
Can you hear? Is it better now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Okay.
Better.
So the tree inventory, I believe, is final. There was some difficulty in getting the final report to us from the University of Vermont, something about the form it was in. So Brian just got back from vacation, and I need to hook up with him, and I've been asking him for the final report on that so we can share it with you. So as soon as we can get that, I will forward it on to Bevan. And then regarding Hawkins Cove, that grant application, we will not hear back on it until probably mid-May. The city also has a pot of money in the trust for decisions to be made around the same time. And Betsy McKeown and I are on the review committee for those projects. There's about 5 or 6 projects that we're applied to for restoration work in the city by nonprofits and HOAs. So we'll be meeting with the trust in mid-April to review those and make recommendations. So there's a number, all of them look like very good projects, from large ones to very small ones, all stormwater related.
Oh, great.
So I'll have more to report on that probably at the next meeting, at the April meeting.
All right, great. Thanks, Jackie.
Mhm.
Did you have any other updates too? I mean, we didn't want to go into long updates, but I know we talked about something just the other day.
Oh, we talked about what I dubbed Replant Annapolis, along the same lines, Replant under Anne Arundel. We had a conversation with the Watershed Stewards Academy that trains what they call the tree troopers, the people that actually, the volunteers that do the planting under that program. There's an agreement between the Watershed Stewards Academy and Anne Arundel County to run Replant Anne Arundel. And at the end of the conversation with WSA, we came to the conclusion that we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. Rather, we should develop a similar program in the city, enter into an MOU with WSA. And because the planting of trees can generate stormwater credits through acres of trees planted, it could be funded through our watershed restoration fund. So I already spoke with the city manager. He likes the concept of this and funding it through the watershed restoration fund. However, we don't want to go out and recruit volunteers and start training them now, which they're doing for the county, without having an agreement in place and having a line item and funding in place. Rather, we will take this year to get an agreement with WSA, funding in place, and then we can work recruiting volunteers over the winter of 2021, 22 to train the tree troopers for the city in March of 2022 to start work in the spring of 2022. We don't want to get people excited and ginned up without having a program in place and having it be a year out. So it makes a lot more sense to do it that way, because the people that you recruit as volunteers, you want to recruit volunteers in the community in which they will plant. So we want to make sure we're doing the proper outreach, especially to get some people engaged in our lower income communities, where tree planting really could be very, very useful. We engage them and make them feel empowered in their community, engaged in their community, feel like stewards of what they plant. And it's a real opportunity for school-age children as well as other young people out of school to get involved and learn new skills and see that there are careers in horticulture and landscaping and other related professions.
Right. And so Jackie, that sounds great. And would it be tied also, or could we help tie it to, future career opportunities and, link them with, local, maybe some of the local federal agencies that, that could hire some of these people once they get experience?
Possibly, but I think more to an at-home local concern is they could be, obviously we have tree planting companies that come in and help deliver trees and help with the planting. So this is a way to introduce them to these local businesses that could hire them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great.
And I think the other thing we talked about, Bevan, was that I'm taking kind of the lead on finalizing the resilience plan for the city and the role that the Environmental Commission can play in that. Now, what I need to provide you is the latest draft of the resilience plan after we went through, the city staff went through the exercise with Throw Environmental and University of Maryland last year. We were left with a draft strategy plan. And then planning and zoning took it and tidied it up a little bit, but it just was left at that point. So I'm taking the lead now on finalizing the draft plan that we can then share with City Council and get public comment on and finalize. So I will provide it to you, Bevan, so that you can share it with the commission, and then you can decide how the commission might best contribute towards it.
Right. And I did want to get a group together of commission members who would, you know, help work and help look at other cities' plans and help tailor, you know, those good ideas that you find in there, and, you know, look at the beginning of the plan that we already have and help, you know, polish it up and make sure it's, you know, comprehensive and things like that. So wanted to act as, you know, Jackie's research team and writing team and things like that, just to help support that. Did anybody
Okay.
have any questions about the things that Jackie mentioned?
I had a quick question, Bevan, about another project I saw come through for Jackie. So I saw a notice for a meeting about a bulkhead replacement on Parks and Rec property on Cheston Ave. And I'm actually not familiar with that property, but I was just curious if there was any opportunity to replace that bulkhead with something else, living shoreline or otherwise. Because it's a bulkhead to bulkhead project, I think. So I was just curious if there, I'm not familiar, so I don't know if it's an appropriate site for a living shoreline, but I just thought I'd throw the question out there.
I know that Beth Bellis, our harbor master, is looking at, you know, all the certain areas where they're doing bulkhead replacements and other improvements at street end parks and other places. And I don't know if I'd have to go back and look at it all. She sent me a list of all of her projects, which again, I can share with you. I don't remember if that one is, there is one she's recommending a living shoreline for. I'm not sure if it's that one or not though, but I'll put that on my list of documents to get to the commission.
Thanks, Jackie.
You're welcome.
Allison, that meeting on March 31st you're referring to, Cheston Avenue Bulkhead Project?
Yeah, that public meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think the Spa Creek Conservancy had advertised that meeting as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I thought there was a requirement that the preferential choice, the first priority choice was a living shoreline before you could do any bulkhead replacement. So it would be interesting to hear about what the city process is with that, how they review them.
The city does require existing bulkheads to be kept in good repair. However, a failing bulkhead, the preference is to replace with a living shoreline unless it's not feasible under the Living Shoreline Act to do so. And then if again, under the Living Shoreline Act, if there's no bulkhead present, the preference from MDE is that a living shoreline, natural vegetation be put in place of an armored shoreline.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks. Let's see. Moving on to our next item, and I think we have just only about 15 minutes left. So it was legislation. We already we decided I guess we didn't have to vote on the Tucker Street boat ramp because Rob already got our comments from that. There was an adequate public facilities legislation being drafted. Is there any chance to review that before it's proposed?
Yeah, there's nothing at this point. You know, I had a lot on my list to try to get done before the end of this year, but you were right, Bevan. I had too much on there, but I did have on there the adequate public facility for water access, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get to it. But I guess one question, if I could say, for the commission would be just to remind you of the last month that the council can introduce legislation. It's not a hard cutoff, but it's recommended is June. And so, you know, I guess if there's any legislation that the commission would really recommend be done this year, because otherwise we're gonna have to wait till the next council is sworn in and next year to really get new legislation in there. The stuff I have, just so you're aware, that I've been in the pipeline, I've been really occupied with this omnibus police reform legislation, not environmental, but it's really still really important. That's been taking up a lot of my time, but the environmental stuff I'm working on, I still have legislation that's probably 90% done for the it would require permits for large trees to be removed anywhere in the city or anywhere on your property, because currently they're only protected in the critical area and if it's part of the forest conservation plan. And then I also have some green building legislation I was working on. But I think that's all I had that was that was actually drafted in terms of environmental legislation. So I did send out that list when we met back in, that was the fall, I guess. But I can certainly send that back out to the commission if there's anything that you would recommend get prioritized for the last few months here.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned the two that the green building and the tree permits. Is that something that you are prioritizing to move ahead with? You think you'll get them submitted before?
Yeah, just because I already have them partially completed. So I can certainly send a draft out or at least get those ironed out and send you more of a final draft perhaps.
Okay.
Rob, did you want to update this commission on, there was a big discussion last night about electric buses.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good. So at the Monday's council meeting, so our transportation department submitted a grant request, and it was I think they've been talking about it for a while, and we're going through the paperwork, but it got just delayed because of COVID. But in any case, the city's putting up about $800,000, and the state is giving us $3 million. So it's a pretty good deal. $3 million for us to spend on our transportation department and services. So that's the good side. The bad side is that's going to be used to get, I think, 1 to 2 new large fossil fuel vehicles. Fortunately, they'll at least be presumably cleaner diesel fuel than the current buses. But there's a lot of discussion because the council really wants to see the city move towards electric vehicles. And I think Jackie's working on and other staff are working on a plan to do that. But this grant was just something, we talked about not passing this and just really moving right now towards electric, but that just didn't prove feasible. One, because we need to get the infrastructure installed. We need to actually figure out, looking at the technology for these larger vehicles. It's much easier for the smaller vehicles to be our starting point. And also the state is not yet giving municipalities money for electric vehicle infrastructure. And so the state's only offering these fossil fuel grants right now. So that's really something that the state and the federal government needs to catch up on, because we can't afford to do all of it ourselves. That's what we have to go after the grant money. But in any case, the council does desire to go towards the electric route, but also go towards smaller transit vehicles in the future. So there was a lot of conversation about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed, our buses are usually not very full. And we've been talking for years that we need smaller buses. And it's just not cost effective to run these huge buses where two or three people are sitting on them. But any questions from the commission for Rob?
Yes, Rob, it's Paul. You spoke of these grants and you said there was no money for EV charging structure or infrastructure, but you said did you say it specifically had to go to fossil fuel vehicles? Or just because we don't have money for EV, that's all you can do, and it's a bit of a chicken and an egg?
Well, my understanding is that the large grants that come from the State Department of Transportation are geared towards fossil fuel vehicles. At least that's my understanding, at least.
Okay. Well,
yeah, and years ago, that was the same case from the federal government transportation money, is you had to buy the large buses. You couldn't buy the smaller ones with their grant money. And I don't know if that's been changed yet either, but
the feds are slowly. I did look into that. They do some grants for municipalities, but it's sort of like a pilot in their end. So I imagine it's really competitive for jurisdictions to get that money. And I didn't have time to look into it deep enough to see if it'd be appropriate for our city in terms of the size, but that really needs to expand.
I thought like one smart strategy I've seen other areas get this done is piggybacking their procurement on with like the state, or, like a larger or the county or something like that. So that might be one way that we could get this done. And I thought the state was going to start buying electric buses or something. I thought I read that.
Just say it's another provision in the bill I mentioned earlier that the state has to go to all vehicle buses by 2030, I think, or all electric buses.
Okay, yeah. So maybe that's a way we get that done, is just piggyback our procurement with them, get a better deal. Right. So we only have about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to keep you all after 9 o'clock. So we did have the report out from our liaisons to all the different environmental groups. I think we're going to scrap that for tonight. And if you want to send us emails around, that would be great. But I think that is a really good strategy for developing our priorities and helping the city council develop their priorities, is keeping close connection to those groups and finding out, what are the challenges and policy changes that need to be done, because they're working on the ground and getting permits from the city and putting in restoration projects. So that'll really help us develop our priorities for, the rest of this year and next year. And as Rob said, there's not much time for, legislation, but there's always policies and other things that we can work on too. I think the only thing we have time left for is, I know, Ann, you were working on a greenhouse gas inventory. So did you want to say, give us a status of that? And is that going to go in the comp plan? We're hoping be part of the comp plan. Is that the goal for that, or?
I think Racine and Jackie are going to be better able to speak to that than me. The greenhouse gas inventory is, we're missing some data still, and missing Ann Stevenson writing some parts of the inventory report still. So that's on me, and I think Racine and I are hoping to continue that work and get it done soon. I think the hope is that the inventory focuses on the inventory, like, where the emissions are, and recommendations for making the inventory process easier and integrated with ongoing tracking that's happening in the city already. So rather it being a big effort on staff or volunteer part, it's integrated in accounting that's happening already or what have you, so that we can do it again in 2 years and it's not a big deal. And
Right, so
there aren't 100 data requests going to different parts of the city to complete the inventory. I think if we limit the scope of the greenhouse gas inventory, then Jackie and the folks working on the sustainability and resilience report can make further recommendations for setting climate goals and how we're going to move forward. And the inventory can just be the sort of boring inventory, and it can set the resilience report up for tracking recommendations and goals. I think one of the challenges to date has been that there have been a lot of climate goals in different places, and rather than choosing one of those goals in the greenhouse gas inventory, we're working to just make that super boring and simple, and doing more of that work in the resiliency report, as I understand it. But I've talked too much.
No, that's great. And so we'd be using this to set some realistic goals, right? As a tool to help set goals.
I think it will be more of a tool for how we can know where we're at. So we haven't done one since 2005 because it's a ginormous pain, not because the inventory itself is hard or complicated, it's that the data is all different places and it's hard to get in one spot. So I
Right.
think the inventory can simply work to say, this is where we are, this is where we were in 2005, and this is how we think we can do this report again in 2023. And
Yeah.
here are ways in which we can tell which recommendations or things that we have implemented as city have made a big difference. Like the LED streetlights have made a big difference. Like here's their slice of the pie. But my concern is that because the recommendations have been in a climate action plan and in different resolves and in different reports, we don't know which ones to sort of work to and which ones to track. And so rather than putting a bunch of new stuff in the greenhouse gas inventory, I think it can sort of compile what's been done already and then sort of set us up for moving forward. That makes sense.
All right, great. Yeah, that sounds great. And it also sounds like a ton of work. So thank you so much for taking this on. Your expertise is, you know, really valued.
It's already seen.
Well, I wouldn't even know where to start to do this work. So it's really big work.
I wanted to
Any
say
questions?
congratulations, Jackie, too, with that city program. That is so cool. The WSA partnership. That's dope.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Well, looking forward to you helping me out with that, Randy.
Sure thing.
Okay, so I just wanted to be respectful of everybody's time. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda except our report out from the different environmental groups. I think that would be good if you know, if you have touched base with your group, just to send us all an email or and we can, you know, put it all in a Google Doc and we can look at it, keep it all there and see what kind of things we want to talk about from the different groups. And also it might be a good idea to invite some of these different groups to our next couple of meetings, you know, to tell us what they're doing and to tee up some issues that they've maybe run across. So with that, I don't have anything else that I wanted to cover on the agenda. Does everybody else, are you all okay, ready to end the night on time at 9 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And I do have a list of a couple of things that Jackie said she's going to get us. I don't think we have any other actions of letters or things we need to write for this month.
No,
But
we already know, I'm sorry, Bevan, sorry.
No, go ahead.
We already know that guests will be coming from GNR and St. Mary's to talk about their living shoreline or other restoration projects.
Right.
In our next meeting. So we'll provide that information in advance if there's something that we all need to look at. It's not clear to me that we have homework before the meeting,
Right.
but maybe homework after the meeting.
Right. And also, if anybody wants to help out with this small group that's looking together, looking at the, you know, resilience plan for the comp plan, I'll send you an invite. And that is, that's an ad hoc working group. It's not formed through our legislation, so it is not subject to Open Meetings Act. But you know, we're not making any decisions in that meeting anyway. We're bringing the information forth, and you know, if the commission wants to take a position on it, we will discuss it at an open meeting. And you know, all this stuff's going to be going out to the public for input and planning commission and council and things like that at open meetings. So I'll send you an invite if you want to join us on the weekends. All right, with that, I propose that we, you know, call it a night and adjourn. I guess we usually vote to adjourn, but I don't think we need to. Jackie, are you okay with that just adjourning? I don't think we need to vote to adjourn.
Yeah.
All right, I'll just say that the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.